I'm in the Gila National Forest, headed to an area called Devil's Park. It's on the northern end of the Gila. Not quite in the wilderness, but on the edge. And I decided to spend a couple days in here. You can drive. I'm not though. The road's in pretty good shape, and there looks like there's a dozer in here ahead of us. So if you wanted to come to this area, you could just drive. They've been doing a lot of road work on there. Not really sure why. They're getting ready for fires or what they're doing. But I decided to go a different way. And so I turned off. I'm gonna go in the backside. This is part of the area that I wanted to check out. So not going the normal way to Devil's Park. But it's pretty cool in here. This is just typical Gila Forest environment. You never know what's going to happen to you on little trips like this. I ran into some guys. They were working cows. They got permission from the Forest Service to clean up the road, and so that's why there's a dozer in here. And the road was, you know, rough. And I get down there to the cabin, and there's a water truck and a truck with a trailer on it, and then another truck and some four-wheelers, and then the dozer. So it's pretty impressive that they got them in there, and they're just gathering cows. I don't know what they're doing really. Super nice guys, but I'm not real comfortable, like, not like a YouTuber, you know, like I couldn't walk around other people filming. So they told me about another place to check out. I don't know if I'm gonna spend the night. It's gonna rain. Just take the horses out just to give them a break for a little bit before we climb back up this mountain back here. Most of the time, whenever I find a homestead and I start digging in to see like who lived there or what it was, or you know, the history behind it, most of the time it's like so and so lived here and they died, usually killed by Indians. And not a whole lot of the backstory or anything like that. The good thing about Devil's Park is there's actually a story that was written later in life from a girl who lived there. And so it's a pretty interesting, and it kind of gives you a little bit of perspective on the people that were living in this area at the time. While I'm checking things out, let me tell you the story about Devil's Park. So there was a guy, his name was Nick Stallworth, and he was from Texas, Enos, I think is how you say it, Enos, Texas. And he thought he was going to make a bunch of money prospecting or mining or owning a mining claim up around Silver City. And so he left his family, came up in this area and started prospecting, and he got a claim that he thought was worth about $250,000. And so he wrote his wife and said to bring the kids. After Nick wrote his wife, her name was Jenny, or Jane, but everybody called her Jenny. She gathered up her two daughters, Stella and Essie and started their way towards Silver City. They were on a train, and it was described as being dusty with just planes in sight, and there was wooden windows with no screens on them. And Jenny was originally from Alabama, and so she was kind of proper Southern. And so she was just cleaning them off the whole time, washing their hands, wiping their face off because it was so dusty. And eventually they made it to Silver City, where she met up with her husband Nick. It didn't take Nick long to realize that mining wasn't as lucrative as he thought it was. So they ended up giving up on that and moving to Devil's Park. Devil's Park is about 15 miles from Alma, 15 rough miles, and their nearest neighbor was 12 miles, and that was just a single man. So he moved his family there, and in 1885, Jenny was pregnant, but she knew that she didn't think she was gonna make it through the pregnancy. And so she went out back and she picked out a plot of land where she wanted to be buried. And when it came time for the baby to be due, they called the doctor. It took the doctor a long time to get there. And she was in the bedroom. They kicked all the kids out, which was rare because they always let the kids in the bedroom. And later that night, Nick came out and told Stella and Essie that their mom had died, and so had the baby. So they went out where Jenny had picked a spot and buried her with the baby in her arms. A few weeks after that, a guy named Chesley, who was working for him, he came riding up. He was working cows, and Nick was sick that day, and he was looking for his gun because he saw a herd of elk. Stella and Essie, they asked if they could go, and he said yeah. So they went looking for elk, and they didn't find the elk. They got bored, and so they went back to the house. When they got back, there was a saddle somebody had left on the front porch, and Essie jumped on the saddle, and Stella started brushing her long blonde hair. At this point, Essie was 7 and Stella was 10. And they were just hanging out on the porch. This was about midday, just brushing each other's hair out. They had a shepherd dog they called Shep. And this dog was super friendly. Anytime anybody would come over, which they was always welcome because there's nobody around. So sometimes it'd be Mexican workers or prospectors or somebody, or ranch hands. Anytime anybody would come, they were welcome. And Shep never barked at any of them. But this time Shep took off running, barking after them. And so Essie got up running after Shep to see what was going on. And she came back yelling Indians. And just then Essie looks up and there's 3 barrels pointed at her, and these were Apaches, and they had blue ribbons in their hair, wide red belts, and they were on a warpath is what it was. And so Essie ran inside and crawled under the bed, and about that time Shep was going around the corral chasing them, and they shot their dog. And their dad came out about that time, and he got shot in the arm, which he didn't even realize till later. But they ran inside, locked the doors, but the guns were in a different building. It was like they had 2 buildings with an awning over them. So he went and got their guns. They locked themselves in the kitchen, and while they were in there, they could just hear bullets hitting the house and the kitchen door and coming in. They even broke like a wooden butter turner. And so they just hunkered down waiting to see what happened. Chesley heard all the shooting and came back, but he didn't want to just run into the middle of it. So he just kind of hung out until dark. And then after dark, the bullets finally stopped hitting the house, and he got in, and they didn't even think about, they hadn't eaten since breakfast, and they didn't want to build a fire, so all they did was eat buttermilk and bread. And they ended up staying in the kitchen for 3 days, and the shooting had stopped, but they were afraid to go outside. So they were just waiting for help to show up. After 3 days, so all of the signs of the Indians were gone. They were just still hunkered down. They knew they were in the area. And 2 guys showed up. And they were really excited because they knew that they got help. But the weird part was they had picks and shovels on their saddles. So when they went out to talk to them, they said they weren't there to fight, they were there to bury them because they knew that they were going to be dead. And what had happened was Geronimo had got a war party together, and they broke out of the reservation in Arizona, and they were headed in this direction. But the problem was, so Nick asked why he wasn't warned. The problem was they went a different route than they had anticipated. And so because they went a different way, there were just people coming in the back behind them to bury the dead bodies. At this point, they had given up on it. So they wanted to get out. And those Apaches had stolen their horses. They scattered their cattle, and they shot a few of them. The ones that were close were shot, and they just took some of the hide and left the rest. And so that night, when those other guys that came to help, they got on their horses and they decided to go to the town of Alma where they would be safe. On the way out, Essie saw some lights up on the ridge, and she asked what it was, and her dad told her that they were signaling the other Indians up ahead of them. So they had like grass on a stick, and they would light on fire, and then they would wave it to signal the other ones down below. So this is at about midnight. They decide to stop, and they look back, and they realize that Stella's not there. So Stella, the 10-year-old, got stuck when her horse wanted to get a drink of water whenever they were crossing a creek, and everybody else left her, and she didn't want to scream or make noise, and so all she did was sit there and cry. And so once they realized she was gone, all the men circled around, or made a big loop and circled, and they found her right where they were crossing the water. And so she was fine, but Essie thought that that was going to be the last time she saw Stella. At daybreak, they made it to the town of Alma, and that was going to be their safest bet because there was adobe walls protecting them, and they knew people there, and so they knew people there, and they ended up staying there for 3 weeks, and everybody was really nice. They were making them clothes, and they were giving them food, and just kind of taking care of them. But Essie said that there was a funeral almost every day because those Apaches were still on their warpath in the area. Eventually, there was a wagon train of ore going to Silver City, and they got a ride with them. And they really liked that because they could just sit on the big bags and they were just riding along. The wagon train was pretty slow, and they were always worried about water, so they would time it where they would get to water at noon, and then they would make it to the next water at time to camp, or in the evening. And they would just do this day in and day out. But one time there was a bunch going wrong, you know how it is, and they were falling behind. And so, but whenever they made it to their water source, there were signs that the Indians had been there that day, and if they were on time, they would have probably been killed. Eventually they made it to a little town, and these people took them in. She said they were super friendly, and there was a bunch of kids, and they hadn't played with kids in a couple years, and so they were just playing, having a good time. This little village was described as having one big main house, and then there were 8 or 9 little houses kind of in a row in the back. And turns out they were polygamists, and the main house was for the first wife, and then each of the little houses was for another wife. But she said they were really friendly, and they took care of them, they played, and eventually they made it to Silver City. Once they made it to Silver City, they got on a train and they went to Alabama, back where they were originally from. The reason why we know this story is because Essie wrote about her experience here later on in life. So remember, she was only 7 when all of this happened, and later on she wrote about it. So it's possible that some of the details might be a little mixed up, because you try to think of a story from when you were 7, but I think most of it is pretty close. Ron Henderson's the one that found this, I don't know if it was a letter or a diary or some kind of journal that Essie had written, and he rewrote it. And so my version of the story, there's no details, there's nothing. If you're really interested in it, you can go to the Glenwood Ranger Station, and they should have a copy of it there, and that'll lay everything out, all the details. So if my version of the story isn't that great, sorry Ron, you can correct me later. The biggest takeaway from me though is I enjoy going and seeing these old homesteads, and a lot of times it's just ruins or a foundation or something, and we don't really know what happened to them. And I think that there's a lot of families just like the Stallworth / McGowan something. I think that there was a lot of those families that did exactly what they did. They came into this area thinking that they were gonna ranch or prospect or just live the American dream. And at that time, with the Apache Wars going on, wasn't a pleasant place to be. So they just picked up, left their stuff, and went back east somewhere where it's a little safer. Can't blame them. Maybe I would have done the same thing, but it makes it more interesting to me. If you're part of the Stallworth / I think it's McGowan family that still comes here every few years to see your great grandmother's grave, sorry for butchering the story. It's not, like, your family history is awesome. I'm not trying to downplay it in any way, but it's pretty cool place that they have. I've been wandering around looking for some Indian ruins that the rancher told me about. Can't find them. He said it's like a circle and like a foundation that's still left. He doesn't know if it was ceremonial or what. You find piles of rocks, but if you squint real hard and turn your head, that almost looks like something. But Stella came back and marked her mom's grave in 1914, and Essie never returned, but her great grandkids have, great, like multiple generations. They've come back multiple times. In 1978, the McGrowans, which is what Essie's married name is, they put the headstone up. So since 1978, multiple family members, so multiple generations have come up to this. But I'm just gonna keep looking around. Well, I'm just gonna find a place to lay down under a tree probably not gonna be too exciting. See this every day. There's a pack of wolves right here. They're trying to get Bo. They're still right there. Ha! Psst. Yeah! It's crazy. Bo, stay with me. That one right, that big one has a collar on. So if you're not familiar with the Mexican gray wolf, they were released in here, reintroduced, and they are hard on dogs. So old Bo right here, not a chance. And those wolves, they were coming to him. They were only 20 yards away from me. And guaranteed, if I wasn't right here with him, Bo would be dead. So, little word of caution with wolves and dogs. So they're running up the road behind me. This is also typical behavior of wolves. They'll follow you. They don't care about me. They're hunting my dog down. So I don't know if you can see them. Sasha, what are you doing? What are you doing, Mew? So I'm talking. Yep. So there's a tank right here, and I was gonna camp at it, but like I said, I'm not worried. They're not gonna hurt people. I don't even think they'll mess with the horses. But if you have dogs, you can't camp around them. They'll hunt them down, and they're not afraid of people, so they'll get your dog. I bet he throws up. Well, I think I'm going to end this video. If a dog gets attacked by a wolf, I'll let you know. So, wildlife, didn't see any elk or deer. I saw a bear this morning, and those wolves, a bunch of cows. So, if you have an elk tag in here, I did find an elk shed. It's the only shed I found. But I'm gonna go find a different tree to lay under than the one I was planning on. But I'll just end this video. So thanks for watching.